Welcome to Table Talk. I'm Rich.
And I'm Rob.
And today we're talking about World War II. And if you don't know, Rob is not Alex. For those of you, some of our astute viewers and astute listeners, if you heard a different voice in your ears, it's because I'm actually joined today by none other than my brother, my bro. Let's welcome Rob to the show with a nice big round of applause. There we go.
Hi, everybody. Thank
Everybody
you.
everywhere in the world is clapping for you, Rob.
I am the more attractive brother. I will say that.
Wow. Right out the gate. We didn't even wait for it.
No.
There it is. You just went straight for it.
I'm sorry, listeners. Turn on your video.
There's no ramp up to that at all. Like, we're just out of the gate, just making brotherly comments. I love it. Fantastic.
There will be a lot of those.
Well, welcome to the show, Rob. I'm glad you're here. This is exciting.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me.
Just so everybody knows, right? Alex is the Alex part of Table Talk with Rich and Alex. Today it's Table Talk with Rich and Rob because Alex and his wife Caroline are expecting, like right now. So we decided to give Alex the month off, give him some time to be with his family, well-deserved time to be with his family, and we wanted to make sure that we could still keep the show going. So now we got Rob sitting here, ready to talk about beer and board games and absolutely everything else, because that's what the show is about. So yeah, well, let's start off with the beer. What we're talking World War II, Rob. So what type of beer did you get? Let's share that first.
Yeah. So my first pairing here, and I slightly tongue in cheek, but when you're playing a board game, you have to get into the board game, and I mean it's World War II, so somebody has to play the Axis side of the board. So somebody's got to drink the Axis side of the beer.
Nice.
So we're drinking. Reisdorf Kolsch.
Reisdorf Kolsch. All right.
Got myself a nice 16-ouncer here, so enjoy it throughout the show.
Oh yeah, that looks like it'll last you through the show for sure.
What about you? What are you drinking?
I will be drinking. Sorry, I got like 3 beers behind me. I'm gonna do this one. It kind of goes in before I lift it up. It kind of goes into the effects of World War II, which is going to be one of our discussion topics today, right? The aftermath of World War II. And I believe it kind of plays into that a little bit. It's called Operation Plowshare. And for anybody who doesn't know what that is, I honestly didn't know what it was until I bought this and actually looked into it. But it's actually fairly interesting. And again, in another episode that Rob and I are going to do later this month, we're going to talk about the effects of World War II. And Operation Plowshare was basically this, from my understanding, and again, if you know more about it, please comment, but it's this, it was like nuclear technology, nuclear bombs, right? It was basically this mission to try and use nuclear warheads for like operational purposes, not non-military purposes, agriculturally. What? Yeah, agriculturally. It was like this whole plan. This Plowshare was basically like they're trying to figure out if they could if there was different ways of cultivating and stuff like that with nuclear warheads. So wow. Yeah, we'll get into it at a later date. So that's where you're gonna kind of see that. But just a little teaser. But yeah, wow. There was a commercial approach apparently back in the 50s to actually getting nuclear warheads into the commercial use. I guess. Wow,
that's kind of interesting.
Yeah, it's a little bizarre.
You don't start glowing in the dark after you drink that.
Right. Yeah. I think I'll be fine. But yeah, we can turn the lights out afterwards to see.
That's good.
Just got like veins just like glowing in the dark. But yeah, well, cool. So this is Operation Plowshare. So this is from Urban Artifact. It's a blackberry Midwest fruit tart, so it's a sour ale. It's from Urban Artifact Brewing out of Cincinnati, Ohio. So shout out to them. Where was your Kolsch from, Rob?
Oh, it's brewed in Germany.
Okay,
The rest of the label is in German. So
so you can't
if
read
I
it.
if I could tell you, I would.
Right, right.
It
I might
Cologne,
be.
Germany.
Where is it from?
Cologne, Germany.
Cologne, Germany. So
Yeah.
not only does that beer probably taste very good, it probably smells very nice too.
Oh yeah, it probably does. Maybe it'll make me smell nice.
There you go. All right. I do want to give a shout out before we move on to the game to Ciliano's Market. These guys helped me pick out a pretty good beer. They're the ones that usually helping me out with the beer selection. But yeah, they're the ones who suggested this because of that reason, and I'm very glad they did. But I haven't tasted it yet. But it's a sour ale, and I'm past my sour ale kick. Did you ever go on a sour beer
No.
kick? Have you had a sour
Most
beer
people
before?
I have, and most people
Oh.
get through that very quickly. Yeah.
Oh yeah? No, there was
Yeah.
like 3 months where I was doing nothing but sours.
Really?
So
It's
yeah.
impressive.
Yeah, I mean it was like a phase. I'm over it
Yeah.
now. Well, cheers to your Kolsch. Cheers to you. Cheers to Purdue Pete. And here's to World War II and a good discussion coming up.
Yeah. Cheers.
All right, cheers. Let's take some time before we get into the game just to kind of talk about us and being bros and growing up and playing games. You're a huge part of why Brewing Boards became a thing and why Table Talk is now a thing and all of that. So yeah. Well, what do you remember growing up with board games in particular? Like what kind of memories does that stir up for you with us or with family in general or friends? Or
Yeah, I think some of my earliest memories, honestly, are the memories of being left out of board games. I think.
Oh yeah.
I remember
Hero Quest?
some of the older members of our family sitting down to play board games that were like too far advanced for us, and so we got to
Interesting.
sit on the couch and watch a movie, right?
Right.
And so I think from then on, I was like, "What is this world, and how can I get into it?" Because I love my brother and I love Mulan or whatever we were watching, but how many times can you watch that, right? I want to go play a board game.
A billion times. You can never not watch. There's not enough. You can watch Mulan endlessly, in my opinion.
And honestly, that was probably pre-Mulan, but
interesting. That's not where my brain goes for you. And for me, like board games were like your thing and Rusty's thing, our oldest brother.
Really?
Yeah, I distinctly remember not being into anything other than like what we were playing at family night, which were games like Sequence, which we had in the show last month, Aggravation, which is kind of a different version of Sorry, basically. Yeah, I remember walking by Rusty's room upstairs, and you guys had Risk out on the original Risk, which is the original Risk behind you, right?
Yeah, right here.
Yeah.
No, that's a remake. But yeah.
The original one had like the little pieces, the Roman numerals, right? Yeah. So I remember you guys had a game going, and I was like, "That's stupid." Like, I don't know, like just being like, I think it was just because like I wasn't a part of it. And again, it's kind of the same for me. Like I felt like you guys had something going that I wasn't involved in, nor was I really that interested at the time. And then I think for me it really hit in like high school where I was like really getting into some more detailed board games and stuff like that. But that was, again, you were heavily involved with that. It was a lot of our my high school friends would come over on Friday nights and we'd all play Risk together. And that got me into like Carcassonne. The first time I played Carcassonne was with a high school buddy of mine, Jacob Cooper, who is actually a huge fan of the show. So shout out to Coop. Yeah, first time playing Carcassonne, he taught me how to play Carcassonne. That's another game that kind of opened my eyes. But yeah, what was do you remember the game? Was I right? Was it Hero Quest?
It was Hero Quest.
Okay, yeah.
I remember like mom and dad and our older siblings would be playing Hero Quest on the dining room table, right? And they'd set it up hours in advance, and we'd go eat dinner, and then we would get our movie going, and they would go to the dining room and play. And I remember like scouring over the board, like, what are they doing?
What
there?
is this?
Right.
Yeah.
And it's one of those games now that's like iconic, and I kind of wish I've never actually played it. So I'd love to be able to get my hands on it and play it with somebody. But I think after that it was, mom and dad kind of saw that I think you and I were interested.
Mm-hmm.
So we were playing games like Sequence and Payday and Monopoly, Aggravation. We played a lot of Aggravation.
And we got kind of into other games. We never really played the same game over and over and over again. So it was pretty eclectic. I remember growing up.
Yeah.
If there was a new game that seemed like it was, good family wise, then it seems like we tried it out. We always had trail mix, and we always had, pizza or something. The cardboard table in the middle of the room. Great memories. I love that. Yep. It is interesting though that's how, like, it's kind of the same. The way I got into games is kind of like, oh, what are they doing in there? And you were kind of the same way, but with mom and dad. I remember those figures. I remember just being interested in like the little goblins or whatever. The little figures that Hero Quest had, and I would just try and play with them as like action figures, which is probably sacrilege, but it's that was my mind as a kid. And then we're about a year apart for those of you that are interested. I am the younger one, even though I am better looking, and
to get in.
And then we played a lot of Risk growing up. The story with Brewing boards and how that came to play, I want you to share what you remember of that, because honestly, back in the day, we had this idea, back, 2014, 2015, you think?
Yeah. Around there.
So those of you who don't know, Table Talk is a thing because it's kind of a branch out of Brewing boards, which is this community of board gamers that I worked really hard to get set up in Brooklyn. We went out to, we've talked about it on the show before, but if this is your first time watching or listening, maybe you don't know, where I basically bring a whole bunch of board games to a local bar or brewery in Brooklyn, and people would just come and play games with us, and we created this membership situation. So, and breweries were getting involved, and there was actually some money being made. It was kind of this really, 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 really small business that was happening in Brooklyn, which is why Alex and I started doing the podcast as well, to kind of promote those events and just kind of have something else that we could do that was associated with it. All of that began in Speedway, Indiana, at least from my memory, where Rob and I really just, and in my mind, you really spearheaded it. Like, you were the one that really was kind of leading the conversation with that. Do you remember the name of the bar?
I don't remember the name of the bar, but it was kind of a subshoot of Delora Motorsports. They have a place there in Speedway that builds race cars.
Right. Because I remember the race cars being on display. Yeah. And
they had, as part of their like property there, they had a little restaurant bar area that they managed. I think it's out of business now, but the manager there loved the idea of what we were doing and was all in. And really that idea stemmed from just wanting to share games with people, And I think 2013, 2014, 2015, we're in this time where like the online stuff is exploding.
Right.
I'm in a personal place where all my friends have either, they got families, they've moved away, and I did too. I had my own family.
Like immediately post college for both of us, pretty much.
Yeah, right.
Somewhat newly married for both of us too, and I remember kind of being in that stage where we wanted to keep it alive, the gaming life a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah, but also like not only keep it alive, but also let people experience more than just like Monopoly, right?
Yeah.
And so like take games to the people, take good games to the people, and what else to lubricate that social experience than pairing it with beer, right? So naturally doing it in a bar made sense, or doing it with some sort of other coffee or tea or some other experience, and then teaching people games was kind of the point. And we started doing it there in Speedway, and we did 1 or 2 or 3, and that was kind of it. I had to decide whether we were going that way or whether I was going to continue with like my job and my career. So.
Right, and that's the thing, is it was actually getting to a point where it was successful, and I don't think I think both of us were like surprised by that.
Oh yeah,
pleasantly, but at the same time, kind of like, oh, like we kind of hit something, but we don't really know if we can follow through with it, right. and that was kind of heartbreaking too. And right, I mean, I was just married. I just got married, and was trying to find work in South Bend, Indiana. It was, I didn't really have a solid job nailed down, and I just remember, those were the highlights of of that time, apart from being newly married to my lovely wife and spending time with her. But, those were the highlights of driving down to Speedway to have a game night with a whole bunch of people. I mean, one night we had, I think the night that really kind of popped our eyes open was, I think you were there alone for some reason. I don't think I was able to make it, but you had like 20 some people show up one night. And
intentionally show up. Like that's not even the people that we like showed up to eat, and we just kind of like, hey, come on, like 20 people show up for the event.
Right, and it was your collection of games pretty much that everybody was living off of for the night. They just grabbed the stack, and then they would take it to a table, and you and I actually sat down at a table and played. I remember playing, was it Jack the Ripper one night? Where you're like secretly chasing somebody, a guy across the board. And we had people, I mean, the whole place was booming. We ended up getting sponsored, I mean, pretty much by Sun King. And
they were
we had no idea what we were getting into. And then it just kind of, like you said, it just kind of fizzled out a little bit because we both had lives that we had to tend to. And then Andy and I, Andy got a job in Brooklyn, and that's how we ended up being in Brooklyn. We moved away. And then with your blessing, kind of built it back up in Brooklyn and turned it into Brewing Boards, which was the URL that was available, because we had called it Boards and Brew up until that point. And then turned it into Brewing Boards, and then kind of made it what it was in Brooklyn, which it was a huge success in Brooklyn, but I knew it was going to be because we had tested it out already. And unfortunately now it's nothing because of COVID, and hopefully we can get that built up again in the future. That's really the plan, but the future's uncertain still a little bit. But now the Table Talk is here, and that's, you're a huge part of why it even exists in the first place. So I'm so happy to have you on it.
But I mean, honestly, I'm honored to be here, and it's really cool to see you take something that I probably didn't have enough time to do and take it somewhere else and just like make it your own thing. And especially in Brooklyn, where there's like, you got the population density, the people that want to get out, you got all that stuff. It's just it was a combination for success, and you did it. So
and huge shout out to all the Brooklyn Brewing Boards members that haven't been able to game with us for almost a whole year now. We know you're watching, and we know I got a message from a couple members almost right before the show, really, that were saying how much they missed the events and everything. So shout out to all you guys. We hope everybody's doing well, and hopefully we shoot these episodes in advance. Who knows what's going to happen in another month, but as of right now we're still not able to do events. So shout out to all you guys, and hopefully in the future we can build that back up. But this guy right here is a big part of it, so you have just as much him to thank as you do for me. And the last thing I do want to talk about is Gen Con 2019. Kind of as a celebration of those memories and everything, we decided to go to Gen Con, and I know I have a photo that I'm going to have up right now of us at Gen Con, just kind of enjoying the nerdiness of all of it. We went with another Brewing Boards member named Sean Wheeler, who was really energetic and really into it. We ended up, we stopped by a lot of booths. We actually got a lot of support for Brewing Boards from some of the local vendors. We stopped at a lot of places and talked to a lot of people about that. What stood out to you about Gen Con that you really remember?
Honestly, I think, living in central Indiana all my life, it's been right here. I've just never gone.
Right.
So, the sheer size of it is insane. I mean,
Yeah.
It's the entire convention center, Lucas Oil Stadium, streets downtown. Like it's just huge.
Mm-hmm.
But aside from that, there's really, and I'd never anticipated going to Gen Con with almost like a business mind. Like I always
Yeah.
envisioned going for pleasure, just to play games and have fun.
Right.
But
Yeah.
it was really cool to see how the industry works and
Mm-hmm.
how interconnected really everything is, whether it's design, artwork, playtesting,
Mm-hmm.
even like into the costumes and that kind of stuff. All that
Yeah.
stuff it's a really small world. I mean, it's
Yeah.
huge, but it's
Yeah.
also tiny. So I think that was kind of one of my biggest eye-opening things while I was there was like, oh yeah, like we talked to this guy and he says I can't help you, but
Mm-hmm.
this person can, that person can go over
Yeah,
there.
they'll be all for it. Go talk to them.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that was really cool to me to experience. Yeah. The other thing that I took away from Gen Con was that we're onto something.
Yeah.
Like nobody was doing it.
Yeah.
And I shouldn't say that. There are people doing this other places.
Yeah. You're right.
But it's like every time you go up and you engage and you tell people what we're doing,
mm-hmm.
hey, we're just taking games we're taking board games to bars and inviting people to play them.
Yeah.
Like everybody was like, that's awesome. There was like so much confirmation that what we had was a good idea. Right.
Right.
That was cool to see. Too.
Yeah.
Just the
that
energy
was cool.
behind it.
And also I don't know if a lot of people know if Brewing Boards Brewing Boards members are watching. I mean, the game collection I started out with in Brooklyn is Rob's games collection. These games behind me are Rob's games. Like these are your games. I just haven't returned them to you yet. I apologize.
They're yours at this point.
But Rob basically donated games to me to take out to Brooklyn to start the events. So again, just another thing that, a part of the way that you're connected with all of that and how it couldn't have happened. I would have had to shell out a lot of money to build up the game capital that I would have needed to do that. So thank you so much for all of that. And hopefully once we're all back and ready, now that we live a little bit closer together, we're hoping to get the events up and running in, where I'm at right now, Grand Rapids, hoping to maybe move it down to Indianapolis too, now that we're within traveling distance. And again, we want to get it back up and running in Brooklyn. We do have some volunteers that have voiced their interest in doing that in Brooklyn. So hopefully all that comes to fruition. Again, I'm not making any promises, but that's on the agenda. But yeah, that's great. Just a little bit about the history with us and all that. So before we get into the game, I do want to actually, same as usual. If you're listening to the podcast, be sure to check out the YouTube channel, Table Talk with Rich and Alex. In this case, Table Talk with Rich and Rob. And if you're watching the YouTube channel, please know that there's also the podcast version out there that you can listen to. Last but not least, this month we are making a big step in actually format-wise. We're trying to make the episodes more digestible for everybody. A lot of you out there are listening to the whole thing, an hour and a half of listening, which is awesome. It's bizarre to think that people are actually sitting down to listen to what me and my brother or me and my friend have to say. Because like we said, we're not experts. We're just guys that like to talk about beer and board games and absolutely everything else. So thank you so much for your support and doing all that. We're gonna change things just a little bit to try and make it more digestible for everybody else. Just to try and make these videos more digestible and actually get videos out on a weekly basis. So this episode is only going to be hopefully about 20 minutes long. We're probably 20 minutes in already. But it's just going to be the beer and the board games in this conversation. And next week, Rob and I are going to be talking about, probably in the same clothes. Next week, we're going to be talking about our stories of World War II. So we're just going to split the discussion topics up and kind of release them slowly. So that way, you guys can kind of, you have weekly content that you can tune into. You can maybe devote, the appropriate amount of time to actually listening to a lot more of the conversation instead of having to dig in really deep on an hour and a half type of episode. For those of you that do listen to the whole thing and like the whole thing, we're going to keep that as well. So at the end of the month, we're going to release the entire shoot for you. So if you liked just watching the whole thing in one go, we'll do that as well, but we're also going to split it up into different segments as well. So just a format change that we're practicing with, and we want to know what you think about it. So feel free to let us know in the comments, and also be sure to subscribe because that helps us out a lot with moving this whole process forward. So cool. All right, you ready to talk board game?
I am.
All right, here it is, Memoir 44. I love the artwork on this. I mean, I can't say anything about it, and before actually just referencing this amazing. This is the cover of the box, and it's just so stunning to me. I want to talk about the artist first, which is so unusual, but it's beautiful artwork. I'm going to butcher the names, but Cyril Dijon, Julien Delval, Don Perrin, and Claude Rica are the artists who did the artwork for this game. So it's the first thing I noticed about the game the first time Rob and I played it. Rob is the one who introduced this game to me. But yeah, it was a beautiful game. So a little bit about Memoir 44. It's 2 to 8 players. It takes about 30 to 60 minutes to play. It's for ages 8 and up. The designer is Richard Borg, not Richard Bray. And of course, it's published in 2004 by Days of Wonder, which is easily one of my favorite board game publishing companies. Rob, I see you got the Ticket to Ride behind you.
Yeah, I got Ticket to Ride, and then I have 8-year-old right now, and he loves the Ticket to Ride, the first Journey one, the kids version. It's great.
Okay. Yeah, so Days of Wonder, I mean, they're just known for, in my opinion, great games. I got Small World behind me. It's they're just great go-to games. If you're new to gaming, if you're new to kind of I guess what we've deemed craft gaming, then
Euro gaming.
Euro gaming. That's a better term. Thank you. The Days of Wonder is a great way to get into that because they have some really great games. So anyway, that's Days of Wonder. So Memoir 44 is a historical board game where players face off in stylized battles of some of the most famous historic battles of World War II, including Omaha Beach, Pegasus Bridge, Operation Cobra, and the Ardennes. So this is Pegasus Bridge. Actually, this is an image of the kind of the opening scenario that you kind of start off with Memoir 44. So I think it's supposed to be a lake in the middle, and then you have the rivers to the sides. The game comes with all these hexagons, these hexagon tiles that you can just remake the board. So you swipe all those tiles off the board, and then you can remake a whole different map based off of what the game actually shows you, which is pretty cool. And one thing I will say about this game is that they went this route of like actually, I mean, theme is great with any game, right? Theme is important. These guys, like, they actually go so far as to like explain the battle to you, like the historical battle. Who goes first? It's usually played as a 2-player game, so you have Axis on one side, allies on one side. So the blue in this scenario are the ally, or sorry, the green are the allies, the blue are the Axis. They go so far as like who even had like the upper hand at the beginning of the battle. So like who goes first is kind of dependent on who kind of had the element of surprise at some point. Yeah. So that's pretty cool. And then not to put you on the spot, Rob, but we see the cards there. Do you want to go into a little bit of how the card play goes?
Yeah, so you can't really see the full side of the card there, but that green card. That's better. Yeah, so those green cards there, the attack cards, the recon cards, they're the driving force of the mechanics of the game. So you have this draw and discard pile that you're pulling these cards from, and then they have typically like left side, right side, center of the board, and it breaks it up into different zones. So that attack card on the left, it has a 3-unit movement, so you can play that card and then move the 3 units on the left side of that board and do your actions then with those units during your turn. Yeah.
Right, and it's such a great mechanic. It's a simple mechanic, but it's absolutely brilliant because, and again, this is like tactical movement style gameplay where which can be a little tedious sometimes because it's when you're trying to take something very physical, like a battle or like a hand-to-hand combat type of fight, and put it into a board game. You kind of have to break it down if you really kind of want to recreate that. You would have to break it down into like this tactical level of mechanics, which is why a lot of board games will like go away from that, and they'll kind of create, a card game that has like hit points and stuff like that will kind of go away from it. I like how they just kind of steer into it hard. Certain, like the tanks can move 3 hexagons. You'll see the tanks over here. The infantry units can move up to 2, or they can move 1 in battle. And there's certain line of sight rules that are associated with this. But yeah, you're really limited to the cards that you have and which section of the board. So you have the left section, the middle section, and the right section. So if you really have the upper hand on one side of the board, but you don't have any cards to play over there, then you're really kind of stuck. So you have to be flexible.
You're limited for sure. It can be like, it's almost like a resource allocation kind of thing, but like the game, the cards, you're really at the mercy of what kind of cards you draw. And, whether you like that kind of luck style draw or not, there's also some strategy there too, right? Like I'm going to save that, like that Recon and Force card in the middle. It's kind of a nice card to have if I need to, strategically gain ground across the board. So I'm going to hold on to that card for a minute and keep that back. So, those cards, there's definitely some drawbacks to them, but if you use them right, they can be an asset too.
Right. And we're not going to go into all the details with the terrain and the rules of movement and all that stuff, but all those cards lined up on the left give you different information about how different units can seek cover, like in the woods, or how you can't see across or through a city or something like that. There's certain rule dynamics to movement and line of sight that make this game so fun. So I encourage you to look it up and play it with friends and family, because it really is. It's one of the best 2-player games, in my opinion, that I've ever played.
I'd agree with that.
Just because it's so fun. You got the dice down here too. We haven't talked about the dice, but in order to attack, this is pretty common with tactical games. In order to attack, you have to roll a certain amount of dice. Grenades are a hit on anything. If you're targeting tanks, you have to roll tanks or a grenade. If you're targeting infantry, you have to roll a grenade or an infantry unit, which is the blue guy. There's a retreat rule as well, which is so fun. If you roll a flag, the unit, if they don't have any protection, they have to move back a hexagon, which is just kind of, it is great strategically to like kind of move somebody else's unit where they didn't want it to be, or to just move them back. But anyway, so the game, it includes 15 different battle scenarios and features our double-sided hex game board. It has a double-sided hex game board. So the previous picture, let me go back to it. This is all land terrain. All right, as you can see, it's all green. And then I go to the next picture, and we actually have kind of a D-Day situation where you have the water, and then you have troops landing on the beach, and then you have the land behind it. So this is just 2 different sides of the same board that's offered. So you can play on one side or the other. There's different scenarios that are offered for them. So each scenario mimics the historical terrain, troop placements, and objectives of each army. These are the cards, like Rob was saying. So each player is listed as a commander, and the commanders deploy troops through command and tactic cards. So applying the unique skills of your unit, infantry, paratrooper, tank, artillery, and even resistance fighters to your greatest strengths. There's like you see, there's an ambush card. There's some specialty cards that will tell you what to do if you can move certain units at a time. There's one card that I love that's like behind enemy lines.
I knew you were going to bring that card in. You use that card against me every time. How do you get it?
I always end up getting it. You can basically like move a unit 3 hexes, which is like crazy, unheard of. And then you can still battle somebody, and then you can move 3 hexes more. It's a very powerful card. I don't feel like it's overpowered by any means. It's just
Oh, I feel like it is.
you
But it's
do
just
really.
because it's been played against me so many times.
Oh well, then of course you would.
I've never got to use it.
um, just a closer shot of the figures. So, so in addition to the double-sided game board, there's over 144 amazingly detailed army miniatures, which include historically accurate infantry, tanks, artillery, and then there's 36 obstacle pieces, 60 illustrated command cards, 44 special terrain tiles, and 8 custom wooden dice. The wooden dice, actually, I never really thought about it, but it is a good touch, I think, with the wooden dice. The only complaint I have with the wooden dice is that the paint fades on them after a while, but yeah, that's a close-up shot. You got the wire, which slows down infantry units going in and out of that. I think we got sandbags there in the background too. So
which those provide retreat cover.
Yeah.
So if you have to retreat, it prevents you from having to retreat. Those are
right. Yeah. If you experience any OCD symptoms, this game can be a little irritating because if not all of your guys are pointing in the right direction, like this guy right here, this bothers me a lot because I feel like he's shooting in the wrong direction. So yeah.
Friendly fire.
Yeah, friendly fire.
It's the other fun thing I'll say about this game is the line of sight aspect of it is really cool. And that last picture was a good example of how sometimes that can be limiting because, you've got this group that's bundled in the back has no line of sight. They're worthless.
These guys.
So although it looks impressive, those guys they can't do anything. So
I think line of sight, they can fire up to 3 hexagons away. So you would think maybe these guys might be able to shoot this axis unit over here.
Yeah.
But really, they can only shoot about 3. You can see over this river, but you can only shoot anything about 3 hexes away. So you got 1 hex here, 1 hex here. They would have to be standing right here for them to have any capability of doing damage.
Yep.
But really, the further away they are, the less dice you can roll. That's one of the rules. So if they were right on top of them, like right here, which you can't be because you can't be on the river, but say the river wasn't here. If they were right here, then these 2 units can battle at 3 dice per. But the further away they are, the less dice you can roll. So pretty cool. And then actually in this picture, I didn't see this, but we have an objective token in the background too. So there's certain, in some scenarios, there are certain landmarks that if you have a unit on them to capture them, you'll score a point for your team, basically. And I believe it depends on the scenario, but I believe the average is about like 5 points you got to score, right?
Yeah.
That sound right?
Yep.
And you score points by eliminating the other player's units. So every unit you destroy is a point, and a unit is basically a collection of 4 infantry units or 3 tank units, give or take. So yeah, you score points by defeating units of the other player or capturing objectives that are on the board. I haven't gotten into the expansions. I've wanted to, but yeah, there's so many expansions, and these are just, I believe, just a few, if not all of them. It might be all of them. I haven't honestly looked into it, but we got Eastern Front, Pacific Theater, Operation Overlord. I have no idea what that is. If you guys are really into Memoir 44, let us know what these games are like, what they add to the Memoir 44 experience. New Flight sounds amazing, getting planes more involved. New Flight Plan is the name of the expansion. Winter Wars, the Ardennes, that sounds so interesting to me. Just don't have a lot of time to dig into all of that, but it looks fantastic, and it just kind of shows how successful this series really is and how loved it is, honestly. Well, have you played any of these, Rob?
I have not personally played any of them. I've seen Eastern Front, and it's pretty cool because it adds a whole other Russian army. So a whole new collection of all the pieces, but in
Gotcha.
like a tan for the Russian.
Gotcha.
The Russians on the east.
Yep.
I have seen the New Flight Plan. I haven't played it, but it does add like bombs and
Nice.
All these miniatures for the planes, fighters, and bombers.
Yeah.
And the quality's there. It's just up to par with the rest of the games. Yep.
Yeah. And then speaking of Gen Con, because this next photo is something that I think we would have seen at Gen Con. We didn't, but I thought you'd get a kick out of this photo.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
We're looking at like a life-size, not life-size, but that tank over here on the left, that's like the size of our head, probably. Right? Or like at least the size of your hand, right? It's huge. This is a huge blown up version. I love the I don't know what that is. A bomber. It's a plane in the background. I don't know. We've got a train coming in. I have no. But we see the hexes on. Like this is the game.
Yep.
Somebody decided that I don't know what these horses are. Cavalry, or maybe just and look at this guy up here on the roof. This is just hilarious to me. That's
awesome.
Somebody went through the effort of making this. But yeah, at Gen Con, Rob and I came across a lot of, or at least one specifically kind of game like this that was kind of a war game. It deals with the same aspect, line of sight and battling. There was one guy that was dressed up in like an admiral uniform. You remember that?
Yeah, he was awesome.
Yeah,
he was really engaged.
He was really into it.
He wanted us to sit down at that table and play.
Yeah,
yeah. These tabletops are impressive, and that miniature work is tough. Kudos to these guys for getting that stuff done. That's hard.
It's pretty funny
to do.
And then recently, I've come across the online version of Memoir 44. So if you aren't aware, or if you want to, so let's say you don't have the game. Let's say you don't want to go out and buy the game. You can at least play the game on Days of Wonder. Days of Wonder Online has access to all, pretty much, well, not all of their games. I won't say that, but they're better known games like Ticket to Ride, Small World, Memoir 44. They have online versions that you can play on Days of Wonder Online. You just have to set up an account with them. And then there is like a points system, or like with any online gaming, you have to buy certain rights. But I think you can at least play one or two games for free.
Yeah, with game board purchases though, it does come with some sort of so many months worth of access to the online system.
Oh, does it? Oh, that's cool. I didn't know that. Yeah. Yep. But this is like the online version. It's really fun. You can, it plays a lot faster. You can play with friends online as well. It starts you out as a private, which is kind of funny. And then it builds you up. The more you play, you can get promoted along the way. So yeah, it's pretty fun. But wanted to share that as well. Go check it out. That's Memoir 44, guys. There you go.
I just have one more thing. I think one of the frustrations of Memoir is some of the scenarios are very one-sided. But the rulebook encourages you to play the same scenario again, but turn the board around.
Yeah.
And see who gets the most victory points total between the two rounds.
Right.
So
which we've done.
There's scenarios that are almost impossible to win as one side or the other.
Yeah.
But turn the board around and play again and see how your opponent does.
Yeah. Right. Yep. That is satisfying when you're in a one-sided. It's an allies heavy percentage win. Like I think on the online game they actually have the percentages. They keep track of how many times this side has won and this side has won. So you can pick and choose. Like if you really like a good challenge, you can pick to play a game as like one side or the other, knowing that your chances of winning are probably about 30%. And then that really kind of, you may even lose that game, but like at least if you like put up a good fight, okay, well, my odds were really low that I would even like be in this game. So it helps. That's Memoir 44. That's our beer. And we're going to be back next week, guys. Hopefully you enjoyed this kind of condensed format a little bit more. Hopefully it makes it more digestible for all you guys. But when you come back, we are going to be talking. Well, what are we talking about, Rob? We're talking about
World War II stories.
Yeah, so I'm excited to share a couple stories, obscure facts that are kind of rabbit hole stories that I found.
Love it. You know the show all too well, Rob.
Yeah, and I mean,
rabbit holes are what we do.
Well, and that's the thing is like, there's a lot of rabbit holes around World War
Mhm.
II. There's so many stories. You have like
Right.
the story, right? That everybody
Right.
learns, that everybody knows. But it's
Right.
like outside of that, we have these tales. One of mine is like a tall tale, right? Of
Mhm.
maybe it happened. I don't know. But
Right.
it's like there's so many things that are alive. It still feels like this war is breathing as some of these veterans are still alive with us, you know?
Right.
It's a part
Right.
of our culture.
Right. Oh man. Yeah, that's great. That's actually really well said. It does feel like it's still breathing a little bit.
Yeah.
So before we get into that, which sounds great, as you guys know, Brew and Board or Table Talk is the show about beer, board games, and everything else. Check out last week's episode where Rob and I talked about Memoir 44 and paired it with our beers that we're drinking right now. One thing I do want to talk about right at the top of this episode, talking, and this is kind of the case, talking about anything that is somewhat serious, but also somewhat mainstream, right? Is I do want to mention, as a veteran myself, and as two brothers who had two grandfathers that served. Our grandfather on my mom's side served in the Coast Guard, and our grandfather on my dad's side served in the Merchant Marines during World War II. So I did want to just make a quick acknowledgement of how serious the World War II was and still is, honestly, and how seriously we do take it. We're going to have a very just nonchalant conversation right now, but that's just who we are, and we're just kind of we're gonna approach it kind of with a little bit of entertainment, a little bit of just kind of nonchalance and conversation. We might have a few jokes too, but we do want to acknowledge that the impact of that war and the atrocities of that war, the civil rights and human rights situations that happened during World War II. We're not making light of that at all, and it is. You're right. It's still breathing. It's still fresh, and it seems like something that we wouldn't even have to like kind of make a caveat for right at the beginning of the conversation. But to me, at least, it is something that I don't just want to dive into lightheartedly without really saying that, without really acknowledging that it still has an impact, right? So yeah, we just want to make sure we just make that little note right at the top of the episode. Another thing that we talked about last week, Rob, that I totally forgot that I wanted to bring up. Do you remember playing with Army Men?
Yes.
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 You remember the game? So Rob and I would then you got to go back to last week's episode to hear other memories of Rob and I in games growing up. But if you don't know, Rob is my brother. He's standing in for Alex this month because Alex is him and his wife are expecting. So prayers are with you, Alex and Caroline. But yeah, Rob is here to fill in for Alex while he's away. And last week we talked about some of our gaming experiences as bros growing up. We had like miniature army sets. I remember that we played with. Traditional army men, the green ones and the tan ones. And one of us was green, one of us was tan. And we had tanks, and we had supply trucks, and we had
little bases, little forts.
Yeah, like little bases that the army men didn't even fit into for some reason. The scale was way off for some reason. And we would get a handful of rubber bands, each of us, and we'd set up our guys at both ends of the room. Yeah, and we would shoot rubber bands at each other. It's like a turn-based strategy game almost. Like we were, like it was my turn to shoot the rubber band at Rob's, and the last person who had a person's armyman standing up was the winner. So. That's, I can't believe
leaning on a tank didn't count, right? Leaning on a tank was dead, right? If the tank wasn't there,
we would actually like run over to the other side of the room and like inspect the other person. If like most of their weight was leaning on something else, then they were dead. It got really complicated with the guys that were sprawled out on the ground with the sniper rifle.
They were hard. You had to
yeah. And then both of us had to have at least one guy that had like he was a huge target, just standing up like this.
He's an easy one.
Yeah, you gotta. Oh, the dogs. That's what I'm hearing.
Somebody rang the doorbell, so the dogs are going crazy, which is a good transition because I've got you'll see the dogs is good. I have dogs. We are dog lovers in the family. Hopefully they quiet down here in a minute, but I do have little teaser there. One of my stories is about a war vet canine.
Oh, really? Well,
Yeah.
let's dive into it. What's it about? Go ahead.
Oh, okay. So this is one of the tall tales that I was talking about.
Okay. Tail.
Tail. I believe this is true. Now, I'm going down these rabbit holes prepping for the podcast and looking at just kind of some maybe lesser known stories, right? And I come across Rip the dog, R.I.P. And he was found in East London after the bombings. So the Germans are bombing London, they're bombing factories and all sorts of different stuff, right? Well, this dog is found just roaming the streets. And he was adopted by the air raid warden. So there's this guy whose job it is to, I coordinate the air raid, sirens, response, all this stuff. He adopts this dog because this dog has a keen scent for finding people buried in rubble.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So Rip the dog is the air raid warden's sidekick, and he responds to the bomb ratings, right? And he shows up on site and he's sniffing around the rubble, and he'll start barking and identifying people buried under the rubble in London. Yeah. So
really,
that warden credits the dog with saving 100 people's lives in London, just buried in rubble. So that's civilians, women, children, men, civilians in East London.
100 lives saved just from people being buried underneath the rubble.
Yeah, a sniffer.
Wow.
Yeah,
sniffer.
He was he was given the Dickon Medal, which is apparently the Animal Medal of Honor in England.
What?
Yeah,
that exists. The Dickon.
Dickon, Dickin.
All right, cool.
Interesting. Probably named after someone.
The fact that it even exists, period. The fact that it existed before 1940s.
Yeah, it just that was this rabbit hole went down another rabbit hole. Like, what's this medal, right? And it was right. I think the medals started in like 1917 or something like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
So he was just one of the recipients of that.
That is really fascinating. It makes sense, right? If like this story about this dog, and then they create this award, kind of like, and it's a lot of it is time perception, right? I mean, we're two millennials, right? Things seem like World War II, 1940. It seems like the perfect time frame where lots of stuff that we know and love or are familiar with are kind of like born in that time frame, right? Yeah. That's just how it feels to me. I mean, I don't know how true that is or not, but like you can usually date it back, like, oh, the reason things are this way is because back in the day when World War II was going on, like this change and that happened. Like you can usually reason something back that far, and that's just, to me, seems like usually where the line ends. But yeah, what happened in 1917?
Yeah, I don't know.
So World War I was 1914 to 1921. So that story probably has something to do with World War I instead of World War II.
It might.
Yeah. That's a cool story though. I like that.
Yeah.
Shout out to our canine friends. And yeah, that's probably why your dogs were barking, because they're like, get to the story already.
Yes. They were excited for me to tell that story. I told it to them last night, just in practice, and they were excited.
They've been in suspense all day long.
Yep.
Waiting for that story to be told on Table Talk in front of tens of viewers. Yes,
and welcome tens of viewers. And if you're not viewing, then view it on YouTube.
Hey, you know what? We got up to 24 subscribers, which kudos to you guys watching and listening. 24 subscribers on YouTube. That's awesome. We obviously want more. So here in the middle of the episode, we're going to ask you to go ahead and click the like and click the subscribe. So if not, we're going to stop telling stories about cute dogs that find people in the rubble. So, but yeah. Okay, I think somebody clicked subscribe so we can move forward. I got a story. Got to edit out my voice squeak. I got a story that I forget where I first heard about this. I think it was one of the documentaries on Netflix. Man, Netflix is a great place to get lost in World War II documentaries. I think it was from one of those documentaries that I was watching. Something that stood out to me as just one of these great war type of strategy moments that I mean, I wish I would have learned in school. I don't. Maybe this is kind of known by a lot of people. Hadn't heard of it before this documentary, and it's the Ghost Army. Have you heard of the Ghost Army?
Mm-mm.
So, I mean, it brings up so many images, like, right? Like Aragorn running off of the ship with, with like, like the dead keep it the way it is shut, all this type of stuff. It kind of brings up like that image. It's instantly really cool, but it actually has something to do with World War II. There was actually a battalion, the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops Battalion, also known as the Ghost Army. And I'm going to do a lot of reading just because I want to make sure I get it right. But they brought together artists, career military officers, and audio experts in a unique unit devoted to the art of deception. And we're talking like, this is like same level as like Trojan horse, right? This is like same level as, a lot. There's a story of like the Revolutionary War with like, they took a fort by just like every guy like raised a flag up to show like they had more units. It's kind of like the same level as that, right? It's just this great deceit. So it's the first mobile multimedia tactical deception unit in U.S. Army history. So they used a combination of science and art, staged nearly 24 missions between May 1944 and 1945 with the sole purpose of tricking Nazi troops about the whereabouts of Allied forces in Europe.
Wow.
In the process, their efforts saved the lives of thousands of Allied soldiers. Its existence was kept secret for more than 40 years after the war ended.
What?
And remained officially classified until the mid-1990s, according to World War II Museum.
Wow.
So there's a couple. Well, here, let me read a little bit more. So one tactic of the Ghost Army was sonic deception. All right. Okay. So audio engineers pre-recorded sounds of military training exercises and the construction of trenches and bridges, and then edited them into soundscapes that could be played on massive speakers within range of German troops to convince the Nazis that the entire combat unit's occupied locations were undefended.
You know what that reminds me of?
What?
It reminds me of like the sounds you hear from the top of that castle in Monty Python and the Holy Grail as they're building this Trojan horse thing in the woods.
Oh my
it's
gosh!
Like
yes. The giant rabbit. Run away! Yes, that's exactly it. That's exactly it. It's so bizarre. So what they did, and the reason I brought in the Luftwaffe. The reason I brought them in because they played this. I don't know if it's the same battalion. Maybe they had different battalions that did the same thing. But the Ghost Army, similar, had a really big role in D-Day. So Hitler was convinced that instead of Normandy, he was convinced that the invasion was actually going to happen at Calais. So he was convinced that that's where the landing was going to be. And the reason he believed that is because this unit or a unit like it had created a completely different like fake tanks, like tanks that had, and we'll show pictures, but tanks that from the ground look very fake, right? But from the air look very real. And they created battalions of these things to make it look like the D-Day landing was going to happen in Calais instead of Normandy. Yeah. Which is it's so crazy to think that like these guys are just like they're running around with like plastic and like tarps and like they're fighting a war of deception with just like stage material. Like it's so crazy. I have another operation of the Ghost Army. So this was deemed their most successful operation, the operation of Viersen, Viersen, which took place from March 18th to March 24th, 1945. For that mission, the Ghost Army used 600 inflatable vehicles. Inflatable vehicles.
That's where our inflatable pool toys come from.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that snowman that's still outside your house right now, even though it's February. That's where it comes from. Fake uniform patches to impersonate soldiers from other units and recordings of pontoon bridge building, again, this loudspeaker sounds.
Yeah.
All to deceive the Germans into believing that the 30th Infantry Division and the 79th Infantry Division were preparing to cross the Rhine River. And it worked. The Germans moved the bulk of their defenses across the river from the suspected location of the two divisions, shelling an army that didn't exist.
That's amazing. That's amazing.
Yeah. It's pretty cool. It's really cool just to think that there's, it's, and we romanticize this war so much, and we think of, the guys that were on the front lines, with the rifles and all that stuff. I like stories like this and the story that you shared, because they just broaden that perspective so much. I mean, not that the spotlight needs to be taken off of the guys on the front lines by any means, but to kind of share the wealth of the experience, really, because it was a world war. Everybody was involved, not everybody, but the world was involved on a large scale. So to hear, these people like engineers and artists and, these kind of just probably ragtag group of military officers that probably didn't have someplace to go, or maybe we're just right out of officer training, or we're just waiting for a new assignment. We're kind of attached to this fake battalion. Can you imagine? Going through all your training, going through, painstaking, the situation just to realize you're going to be in charge of inflatable tanks. You're going to fake crossing the Rhine. You're going to be in Europe, Nazi occupied Europe, with inflatable vehicles.
It's a great use of obviously there's so many skills in the world, right? And carrying a gun on the front lines or operating a tank or all these things that we classically think of being a soldier,
right,
are just like a tiny subset. And so it's cool to see how even strategically these people were using all these other skill sets to do something almost completely unheard of, ludicrous, right? And the risks of, there aren't really any risks. Like if you get caught doing that, it's just you might get laughed at.
I mean, the situation with the Rhine River, I mean, they were getting attacked, right? The location where they were at was receiving fire, right? Like they were getting shelled pretty hard. So whether or not they were there, I don't know. Maybe they had packed up and moved away the second they realized that they had, they got the fish on the hook. But you're still in harm's way. It's almost it's almost as insane it is to really take a step back in history and imagine, you and I, obviously, we're of an age, if anything happened right now, we would definitely be involved, in a draft or anything like that. To imagine going from life as it is, life as normal, to being a soldier, jumping out of a trench, running across. I mean, I have a little bit of instinct for that now because I've gone through the training, but going from that, it's hard enough to imagine that. Imagine, not really being that well armed, right? Yeah. Pretending it's almost like running into war, with a toy gun, in just a plain imaginary, but going up against people that can really shoot back at you. It's almost more impressive in some ways. I say that very reservedly, but yeah, it's almost more impressive just pretending to have the forces that you obviously don't in a military situation. So yeah.
Yep, talking about ghost armies, I have a ghost story as well.
Okay.
So one of the it's similar along the lines of deceptions, but it's really not. It's not about deception really. It's about strategy. And it's a story about the USS Lexington. This ship it's an aircraft carrier that was built in the 20s, 28. So it's 1928 aircraft carrier. Mm-hmm. This is an early aircraft carrier, right? It's
right.
It's been around for a long time, even before the war breaks out. So in 1942, it wasn't involved in Pearl Harbor, but it was in the Pacific during Pearl Harbor. It was out on patrol. So in 1942, it's sent to Port Moresby in New Guinea, which really was, in the South Pacific area, was a port that was a supply port for a lot of the Allied forces in Australia, New Zealand, and then again throughout the islands in the South Pacific. So it's an important port, and the U.S. Navy had information that the Japanese were going to try and take Port Moresby. So in 42, along with a bunch of other ships, this USS Lexington was sent to Port Moresby to defend it. And I don't remember the story specifically, but for days, the weather was hazy, there was rain, you're in the middle of the ocean, but these fleets just kind of like wandered.
Danced around each other?
Yeah, they couldn't find each other.
Yeah.
They'd send off fighters to go searching for the other opposing fleets, and they'd come back, they'd say, yeah, we got some over there, but they just couldn't find each other. So at one point, though, the USS Lexington did come in close contact with some Japanese fleets, and they took on 2 torpedoes, hit the Lexington, but it wasn't enough damage to sink it. So all the personnel on board start evacuating. The captain says, no, we're going to sink this ship. But they got out of range of the Japanese fleets and lost them. So then what happens is the U.S. Army, or the U.S. Navy, then decides to sink this ship, launches torpedoes at it after everybody's off the ship. Now, I don't want to gloss over this. 216, I think. Let me read it.
Wait.
216 people died.
Which ship? They're sinking the... Wait, okay, so hold on. Their own ship.
Their own ship.
They're sinking their own ship.
They're sinking their own ship. So it was damaged. It was going to be a chore to get this thing back to harbor, right? They didn't want it to be a Japanese trophy.
Gotcha.
So they sink this thing after everybody's off. But 216 people did die on board when the torpedoes hit from the Japanese. And then, so they sunk the ship right there in what was called the Coral Sea, the Battle of the Coral Sea. So it was lost right there. 1943, back in Massachusetts, there's a shipmaking company that's already making a new aircraft carrier, right?
Okay.
And it was going to be named, I didn't write the name of it down. It was going to be named something else. But the admiral of the Navy said, name it the Lexington. So in 1943, this boat launches, goes over to the Pacific Theater, and is seen numerous times by Japanese ships in the Pacific Theater for the next couple of years. And it became, it had the nickname of the Blue Ghost, because the Japanese
thought it was the same ship.
They sunk it. Yeah.
Wow.
They thought they sunk it in the Battle of Coral Sea, and there it was floating around again.
Wow.
Less than a year later.
Yeah, that is cool. That was a great idea. Whoever that admiral was suggested it. Another kind of warfare that really isn't. It's so much bigger than just like lining up and shooting, across the way type of mindset. Like that mental warfare. Yeah. To have the presence to like see something happening and being able to see it from your enemy's eyes, kind of getting into kind of like a Sun Tzu type of conversation, but like being able to kind of see the perspective that your enemy is looking at you as, like that takes a tremendous just awareness, right? So that is a cool story. And how terrifying if you were one of those guys that like, you're like, you come back home after that mission and you're like, we took down an aircraft carrier. Yeah. And then you go back out and you're like, that's the same one.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Wow. That's the thing is you have to assume these kind of mental strategic moves are being made all the time. And these are just like the tips of the iceberg. Right. So, but let's say a couple thousand Japanese soldiers or seamen thought they saw this ship go down. Yeah. It's a couple thousand of how many, but you do that then,
Right.
and you do it again, and the story grows, and you do it, somewhere else with something different.
Right.
Like that all
Yeah.
adds up to
Yeah.
like this
Yeah.
big demoralizing. It's almost like like reverse propaganda.
Those are our stories. They're World War II stories. I only had that one, the ghost ship, or sorry, the ghost army. But yeah, there's so many World War II stories. There's not a shortage of World War II stories. I think
No.
that's partially the problem, right? Trying to
Yeah.
find something that might shock people or might be something that you wouldn't see on a Hollywood movie or something. Although now that we've publicized the story about the RIP dog,
Yep.
I feel like that's like it's got Tom Hanks written all over it.
I think it does.
All right. Well, that's the show for this week, guys. Like again, we're splitting the episodes up. We're gonna post the longer version at the end of the month. But for now, we're gonna go ahead and call it quits. My beer's almost done, so I'm gonna get a refill for next week. But
Okay.
that's our show for now, guys. If you guys have any other stories that you want to share with us, please do comment and let us know. Anything that you think is interesting, anything that you want to add on to what we shared today. We'd love to hear from you. And go ahead, make sure you click the like button, click subscribe so you can get an update on all of our videos when we post. And then we'll be back to talk next week. I think next week we are talking about effects of World War II.
Effects of the war.
Correct? We're going to talk about the effects of the war. And well, I think the good place to start is beer, right? Because it is a show about beer and board games and everything else. But beer, pre World War II in America, and just from my understanding, and again, if you have a different understanding, I want to hear from you. But beer pre World War II in America didn't seem to be very, what's the word? Crafty I guess is the word. It didn't. I don't think we had hit our stride yet as American brewers. Brewing back in the 20s and the 30s is really kind of this European thing that's going on, and it hasn't really taken hold in America yet. Would you agree?
Yeah, I agree
Rob?
with that. I mean,
Yeah.
You could probably trace it to our roots, right? Like who we are as.
Yeah.
But we kind of left those roots behind.
Yeah.
And we colonized America, right? And
Right.
we hadn't got there yet.
You're right. Yeah. And not being an expert on the history of beer, but I think it's pretty well known that beer in America, craft brewing in America really didn't start cranking up until after the war.
Yeah.
So I really think we have, soldiers' experiences in Europe to thank for bringing those tastes back to the United States. Because soldiers drink beer. I don't know if any of you guys know this. I can speak from personal experience. Even in theater, soldiers will drink beer. Not when they're on duty, obviously, because that would be irresponsible. But yeah, when they get leave, they get time to go out on the town wherever they're stationed. Soldiers inevitably will find a bar,
Yep.
and they will drink, and that is pretty normal. That was pretty much the norm back in the 40s as well. So I think some of those tastes, we have a lot of great breweries, or a lot of great beer that's being made in Europe and England around this time. That I think a lot of those tastes came back with them stateside. I believe during the war, because of what Rob was talking about with kind of the kind of rationing that was going on, the shortages that were going on with just recipe wise ingredients, what we use to make beer. I believe there was only like 93 breweries in the United States that were actually functioning like immediately after the war.
Wow.
And I don't know names. I'm assuming some of those are what we would now identify as like Anheuser-Busch or something like that. Like these kind of big brewing companies. I can't confirm that. I'm assuming that that's kind of what those were that kind of survived that era. But then you have, after the war, I think brewers in general realized that there's a big demand for these soldiers that are coming home, getting married. Now they're living in like this rural America, and they want good beer to drink.
The other side of that is, on the European front, because of the effects of the war, there was almost a lot of culture lost when you think about it in terms of what beer was, what it could be. When you're changing ingredients, or it's kind of dark, but when you talk about changes in power very quickly, right? There's now a negative connotation to this beer, right? At least immediately post-war. So, there's another thing. It's not just here, right? We did bring beer back with us as soldiers to America, but the methods, the ingredients, the popularity of their different styles and everything over there changed too.
Yeah, that's a good point. The one thing I was looking at with beer specifically as one of the effects of the war, there was a campaign that I found that was run during the war and immediately after the war called "Morale is a Lot of Little Things." It was a big kind of publicity movement that was going through America at the time, which kind of showed soldiers, like, it was kind of like little pamphlets and little things that you'd probably find like the newspaper, something that might be stuffed in the newspaper of soldiers drinking beer. It kind of made beer what it is. It kind of linked beer to patriotism, if that makes sense. And that's kind of where that kind of began. So besides beer, one of the first things I think of with effects of the war is NASA.
NASA.
Yeah.
All right.
Because cool. and this I think Alex and I had this conversation, I think, before. We touched on it briefly. Wernher von Braun. A little bit about Wernher von Braun. He was a German-born American aerospace engineer and space architect. He was the leading figure in the development of rocket technology in Nazi Germany and a pioneer of rocket and space technology in the United States. He worked for the United States Army on an intermediate range ballistic missile program. Ended up getting involved with the satellite Explorer 1 and launching that. And then eventually he was assimilated into NASA and became part of that whole shebang as well. So these Nazi scientists were actually, they were kind of the leaders of their field in a lot of areas. Rocket science really was something that the Nazis were kind of ahead of the game in, right? So after the war, you have all these Nazi scientists that are leaving Germany, and it's almost like this like fantasy draft for the Allies to like really pick and choose who they want. I mean, you have scientists that went to England, you have scientists that went to America, and believe it or not, whether you want to believe it or not, Wernher von Braun was a Nazi scientist that basically created NASA. I mean, he didn't create NASA, sorry. But he was a driving force in the 50s, the moon race.
Yeah, rocket technology.
So yeah, kind of an interesting connection between, we go from World War II to Cold War, and how Nazi scientists really were a huge part of, that world. So
yeah, and I think the effects of World War II, when we talk about it broadly, you're talking about von Braun and his, rocket development, which is kind of like this subcategory of aeronautics. But World War II is really the first time we see. No, there were some in World War I, but planes used in big capacity during wartime.
Right.
And we have a huge, commercial airspace now where, these technologies have been proven, and they're very safe, right? We get on planes, well, not now, not in 2020 and early 2021, but, we get on planes frequently and fly thousands of miles and don't really even think about some of the safety implications. And a lot of that was pioneered in the technologies that came from World War II.
Right. Yeah.
So,
well,
and von Braun's one of those guys.
Yeah. I did have a question for you, speaking as an engineer, to call you out as an engineer. For those of you who don't know, Rob is the smart brother of the two of us. He's the graduated from Purdue with the civil engineering degree, right?
Yeah. Yep.
Get
Can't
Purdue
see-
Pete up
Can't
here.
see my boiler. Yeah, my Purdue Pete there, but he's covered up.
Oh,
Oh well.
come on, chug it so we can see Purdue Pete.
Later.
No, don't worry. But sporting the Purdue Pete glass, but this might not be anything that you had prepared, so sorry to put you on the spot. But
That's right.
speaking as an engineer, like what engineerically, I don't know if that's a word, but what from an engineer's perspective do you think came out of World War II?
Well, I mean,
What comes to mind?
it's almost one of those questions like, where do you start?
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
I talked about aeronautics already. I mean, it's a science that was probably pretty well understood going into World War II, but as war has a tendency to do, it made understanding that science a lot more valuable, right?
Right.
So, you know, we came out of World War II with a lot better understanding of how things should be designed in terms of cutting through air and even propulsion, lift. Like
Yeah.
we understood all those things better
Right.
after World War II than we did going into it.
Right. And basic mindset for me says, I think World War II confirmed airplanes good, blimps bad.
Yeah.
Right.
Blimps, balloons, those kind of things. The ranges don't work. Yeah. Bad
Right.
idea.
And hydrogen,
Bad idea.
bad idea.
Yeah.
So that's probably just from a layman's perspective, that seems to be at least one of the more basic things that came out of World War II.
Another thing though, and it, you know, this is controversial, I guess, but I mean, you have this whole atomic studies, right, with the hydrogen bomb that really leads into the groundwork that was laid there, leads into a lot of current modern particle physics, and how we understand the way the world works at a molecular or atomic level, and then some of the technologies that came from that. Right, we have all these things that we use day to day that we don't even necessarily know stem from that atomic theory stuff. So, power, right? Power is a good example.
Yeah.
Around the world are harnessing the use of nuclear power based on some of the work that was done, that ultimately resulted in the loss of thousands of lives. But you know, and it's sad that it has to come on the heels of that kind of stuff, obviously. But yeah, there's a lot of scientific stuff that came from World War II. Or that's the other thing, is it's kind of this perfect time, right? We were developing a lot of material technologies. The Industrial Revolution had happened prior. We had the capacity in industry to do these things, and then all of a sudden came the necessity to do these things. And you know, there's this big push of, hey, we need tanks. Hey, we need planes. Hey, we need all these things to make, and even some of the electronics, right? And the mechanics of putting a submarine underwater, like that's mind blowing, right? And we were able to figure that stuff out and then harness it to ultimately conduct war. But it's cool.
But then have it move on to other things. Nuclear power was one of the things I had listed as an effect.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's obvious, but I don't think I really realized it. I mean, somebody says the word nuclear, they're automatically thinking war, right? A warhead or a missile or something. Like, we're currently living in that, right? It's not like that's not, you know, when we're talking about the effects of the war, we're still kind of like you said in the first episode, it's still living, it's still breathing. And you know, like that, we're still kind of living that world in a way where, like, it's we're still talking, like, nuclear power is a huge big button topic. I get skittish just even talking about it, because I don't know if, like, I should be, or if now the government is watching this live as we're talking.
If they're watching, they realize we have no idea what we're talking about.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I wanted to ask you about our Uncle Mac.
Yeah.
So, and this is a story, and I don't have confirmation of this at all. That's kind of why I wanted to run it by you. We had Malcolm Bray is our grandfather's brother, and as the story goes, he was stationed in Fishkill, I believe, New York, and was part of the team, the scientific team during World War II that developed high viscosity oil. Is that how you remember that story?
I'd have to go back and revisit it. But
okay.
Yeah, he was working with. He's a chemist by trade and
right.
was highly involved in. I think it was multi-viscosity oil. So
Multi-viscosity.
It's a type of oil that will kind of change its properties depending on the needs of. For the biggest application, I think, was in fighter planes. So depending on elevation and temperature constraints with fighter planes.
Because you get to a certain elevation with standard oil back in the day where it would freeze or clump up or yeah. And what we have now, what's running in your car right now, at least from my understanding, is this multi-viscosity oil, right?
Yeah,
it's kind of this. It's kind of from my understanding, it's kind of the standard now of what's being sold. Yeah. Maybe I don't know if I have that right or not, but it is kind of cool to kind of look back and see that we have some kind of family tie to that discovery and that that evolution of thought and technology and all that kind of stuff. So
yeah, and I think it's a cool nod to what Americans were doing, because Uncle Mac was what was called a conscientious objector. So he didn't want to fight. He didn't want to.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, he chose.
Maybe I did. I just forgot about it.
On the front lines. So
interesting.
But they took his brain, right, and they said, "All right, looks like you can do this." So they put him on a team of people that contributed in a way domestically here on our soil that contributed in a way that was able to help, progress the technologies and everything that ultimately really helped not just Uncle Mac, obviously, but all these brains collectively, all the soldiers on the front, all the, as we talked last episode, all the artists holding prop balloons, right? And like all these people, it took all these people really to win the war. It wasn't just people driving tanks, right? So, that's a cool testament, I think, to what Americans did and came together to do there in the 40s.
Yeah, absolutely. What did you have effects of the war? What's kind of on your mind with that stuff?
I think, I think it probably teases over into next week's episode a little bit, but some of the cultural effects of the war, like I think of our grandparents and how frugal they were. They it wasn't uncommon to see grandma pull brownies or whatever out of the fridge and fold up the foil and put it back in the drawer,
I've never thought about that before, but yeah. No,
you lived through this time that was so different, right? In terms of rationing, using what you have. And it's interesting. I think maybe our generation is kind of the first ones that are looking back at that and saying it's different, than what they did. For us, it's throw it away and get some new ones. If we had to live through that same process, we'd have a different mindset.
Right.
So,
obviously it explains. Sorry, not to interrupt again, but
you're right.
We're going through the pandemic and everything. It's interesting. Yeah. It's interesting with our grandparents to finally understand, and I mean not fully understand, obviously, because we never really can fully understand. But they lived through so much. Obviously, you lived through the World War II, but then you also lived through JFK assassination. You lived through,
Great Depression.
Great Depression, but then also when we were kids, 9/11 and kind of all this types of stuff like COVID. Everybody, and I feel like COVID kind of gets looked through from a millennial perspective, where it's like, woe is me, It's like, it's like, you know what, guys, like this, if this is as bad as it gets, this really isn't that bad, to be really honest. Right. It gives you kind of a new perspective on what we've been dealing with for the last, not even a whole year, honestly, and we're talking World War II lasted, how long was World War II?
Like 6 years 6 years-ish, something like that. No, but to add to that, like I had this I had this stat queued up for last week's episode and I didn't use it, but something like, and it's hard to quantify, at the end of the day, you see estimates everywhere from 50 to 100 million people died in World War II.
Right, I had 60 million total.
Yeah, so I mean that number varies, but you've got civilians, children, armed forces, men, right? Mm-hmm. That died in this war. And to your point, here we are sitting in the COVID pandemic, and we just hit recently, depending on how this airs, we just hit the 2 million mark globally, right? Like this is a kind of a drop in the bucket. And I hate to say it that way because it's a pandemic, but it's also a drop in the bucket compared to what was going on in the world 60 years ago, 70, 80 years ago at this point. So
no, you're right. You're right.
Yeah, it's just one of those things. It's like, woe is me, but also, what can you imagine this going on for 6 years, right?
Right.
And having to live through all that, it's humbling.
Right. It affected the way people lived their lives, which kind of leads to like the Generation X mindset, which kind of leads to the millennial mindset, which is, we haven't had to live through something like that. It does seem very inconvenient for us to not be able to socialize and go out to the bar and drink with our friends and hang out.
Like you said, as older millennials, I get lumped in the millennial category all the time. I don't necessarily feel like I am, but we are. And and that concept, really the whole outlook on millennials is they have it easy and they don't appreciate what they have. And I think this is why, right? Like we didn't live through these things. And because we didn't live through those things, we don't understand some of the mindsets of the generations before us.
Right. And that's not anybody's fault, really. It's just, I think it is a healthy perspective to have as a millennial to look at the older generation, which is, it's been said, it's almost been overused, but not even the greatest generation that's ever lived that did serve and lived through those times to make America honestly the greatest place to grow up. A good portion of that goes to this generation that really did stand up against a very it's so otherworldly. And I think it's because, and this gets into next week's conversation where we're going to talk about why World War II is so popular and why it still kind of resonates with us. But it just seems so otherworldly that there's this country that is trying to take over the world. It seems like something out of a video game, but that's a good point, dude. The long-term effects of the people who lived through it and actually how it's been passed down generationally to us sitting here talking about it.
Yep. So can only hope that, if time came, we'd respond the same way and
absolutely
act as well as they did.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, you'd like to think so. I mean, who knows?
2020 might have proved us wrong, but that's
no, I think we'd be fine. We would, I think. But anyway, we're gonna dive into what makes it so memorable. Why do we resonate so much with it? We're just we're gonna play around with really what it is that really kind of draws us back to this story. And Rob said it really well. It's still fresh. It still feels like it's alive to us, and we want to kind of figure out, just kind of play around with a conversation about why that is. So, Yeah. Why do you think, Rob? Why do you think that World War II is why do you think it feels like the story, right?
I
It
mean,
feels like
I feel like
yeah,
we're going
go
to talk about a lot. I think we're going to deconstruct a lot of feelings here about why we feel it's relevant. But
Yeah.
I just want to start with like the gamer's opinion. I mean,
Yeah.
there's a lot of tactics there.
Yeah.
Right. There's a lot of things that could have gone differently. There's a lot of
right.
risk involved. There's a lot of luck involved, but also a lot of strategy. And
Right.
with everything that happened during the war, actually like lives at stake,
Right.
things, right?
Yeah.
And so I think from a gamer's perspective, it's fun to reenact that, right? It's fun to
Yeah.
dive into that and put yourself in the headspace and say,
Right.
what would I have done, or what could have been done differently, and what would
Right.
the outcome have been? So I
Right.
mean, you know, I just kind of pulled a couple fun. I'm not going to
Yeah.
call them World War II specifically, although this one definitely is.
Yeah.
But you've got war games is this whole thing, right?
Yeah.
Because we like to play with these tactics.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think World War II provided a global setting for us as gamers, board games, to say, hey, we have this whole thing that happened in reality that we can now play with, right?
Right.
Have fun with.
And it's yeah, and you yeah, calling war a game is it seems a little, I don't know, insensitive maybe, but it really is. I mean, when you really think about it, I mean, it's just it's strategy, and there is a game that is played, honestly. And some of the stories we shared where there's like this deception that's involved, and there's this, you know, it's maybe it's not the right word for what war is, you know, but it is. It's basically just a large scale game. And even in the military, when we practice for war scenarios or battle scenarios, we called it wargaming, and it is what it is. It's you're strategizing, and you're playing a role, and you're trying to figure out, like, you know, how would I respond to this. So I think from a gaming perspective, it makes perfect sense. You know, it's you know, Axis and Allies is a great great example, just because it's, you know, it puts you, and it's so unique because it puts you in the position where you could play as one of the Axis powers. Right. And, you know, you're kind of thinking from their perspective, and you're kind of getting behind their motivations and stuff like that too. It's interesting, and it's almost, you know, I don't use that word, I don't use it very confidently, but it's almost educational, right? It feels like it's giving you it's diving deeper into something that really impacted the world and impacted it hard, you know, back in the 1940s. So
there's a limit. There's a limit to that, though. Like, the games we play are tactical. Yeah, they're strategy. Like, they're, if you were to actually, you said get in the mind of some of these other players. Yeah, it's like if we were to actually get in the mind and play the politics, or maybe some of the religious things, or whatever you want to call it, right? The cultural things that were going on in these people's heads, we wouldn't want to go there. Right. You're right. So it's like, it's interesting because we play it at this level, but deeper than that, we just leave it alone. Like, we don't want to go there. Yeah, there's a certain level that we're willing to accept, and another level that we don't want to touch. Yeah. For good reason. I mean, we've talked about it in previous episodes. I mean, we're not glossing over the fact that World War II was probably one of them. I mean, we're talking about, from my understanding, 60 million deaths, the largest death toll of any war. And not to mention the human rights, civil rights atrocities that happened during the war. So we're not glossing over that. But I mean, you know, from a gaming perspective, it's very interesting. And for me, it's really this concept that you have the ultimate bad guy. The ultimate bad guy. And I mean, and it's so hard to look at. Man, I'm treading lightly. It's so hard to look at Hitler as anything positive, right? because there's nothing positive about him. I mean, honestly. But if anything, we kind of have this
this living. This isn't Darth Vader. This isn't Sauron from Lord of the Rings. This is a real life person who had a real life villainous goal, right? And
Right.
it's so. And the thing about story, the thing about narrative is, if you're gonna pick up a book and read it, or if you're gonna if you're going to watch a movie, you have to identify with the threat that's happening. You have to identify with the peril that the person is in. And I think what World War II did is it gave us this very visceral, antagonist, right?
Yep.
That we could all universally say, we don't want this, and this is the line, like this is where we will not cross, and spawning from that, you get there's a reason Indiana Jones. There's every other Indiana Jones movie is against the Nazis, and there's a reason that Marvel is fighting against the Nazis. There's a reason that you see it over and over and over again as the go-to bad guy, because they really kind of laid that. They laid that
It's an easy target.
They laid that foundation for this is the worst thing that anybody that we've really done, at least in what we would consider modern day civilization. So you're right, though, with gaming, from a gaming perspective, we enjoy the strategy, but you're right, we're not going any further than that.
That's the other thing I think that's fascinates us with World War II, and you're hitting the nail on the head, is the fact that we were able, and Americans are a good example. This wasn't a threat to American soil. This was not. It became a threat to American soil. It initially was not a threat to American soil,
which is why it took so long for us to get involved. Yeah.
Right, but ultimately, this was bad enough that millions of people, half the world over, decided to get involved. Mm-hmm. I think that's huge in telling the story, because it wasn't just like a local conflict. It wasn't
right.
It started that way, and it got bigger and bigger, and people picked sides. But it was so divisive that countries from all over the world felt the need to pick a side and get involved.
Right. It was polarizing. You were either dramatically a Nazi, right, or you were dramatically anti-Nazi, right? It was like this fascism, anti-fascism type of mindset that was going on at the time.
I think that definitely contributes to why it's still relevant, because it was, it was huge, right? And it was so polarizing that you picked a side, and it was right or wrong. There's even stories of people thinking they were on the right side all along, and near the end of the war or after the war saying, no, I didn't know what I was signing up for, or
didn't know what was going on, really.
Right. Yeah.
Or, I mean, that itself is kind of,
it's controversial.
Not to get into it. It is controversial, and I'm not gonna gloss over it and just plant a universal statement on top of it. But there are people who, I believe, probably were supporting but didn't know exactly the atrocities that were happening. I also believe there are people who claimed that they didn't know but did. So it goes both ways. And we've already hit on it. The scale of it is obviously what's so intriguing about it too. The next closest war, and this is according to Wikipedia, the next closest death toll is 3 kingdoms, 36 million.
3 kingdoms?
3 kingdoms. So it's the period of 3 kingdoms refers to the period between the foundation of the state of Wei, W-E-I, and the conquest of the state of Wu by the Jin dynasty in 280. The earlier unofficial part of the period from 184 to 220 was marked by chaotic infighting between warlords in various parts of China. It has something to do with the end of the Han dynasty. We're talking about this is 220 after Christ was born.
So that's
almost 2,000 years.
Yeah.
None of us have experienced anything as traumatic and impactful as far as just annihilation almost That again might not be the right word, but 60 million World War II. The next closest thing is back in 220, we had 36 million. Was the next largest death toll that was so that it's out of this world numbers, and hopefully numbers we never get to see again. But yeah, I think the scale of it really, along with the narrative aspect, the antagonist aspect, is what makes it so memorable. And speaking narratively, and Alex and I are both kind of storytellers. Yeah. We like story. We're both working on our own kind of creative projects. Any good villain, and this is just speaking fictionally, any fiction, right? Any good villain has what we call goons, right? So, or I guess there's another term for them called mooks. And Rob knows about this because we were in the fantasy football league together. And every year I changed my fantasy football team to different types of mooks or goons from a famous villain. So you have a whole bunch of them. And it's not really something you realize until you really think about it. You know, Lord of the Rings, you have goblins, you have orcs. Star Wars, you have the stormtroopers. There's plenty of others. Wizard of Oz, you had flying monkeys. Harry Potter, you have the Death Eaters. There's all these. Any good villain has goons that carry out all the bad things for that villain, right? And I feel like, you know, Nazi Germany just fits so perfectly into that formula, right? You have the villain, and you have all these goons that you can really kind of, you know, make as evil as you want, or give them any type of characters. That's why I honestly feel like movies like, you know, Inglourious Bastards, or like in, you know, Indiana Jones, we already talked about that, but any other movie that kind of sets itself within this World War II setting is just so perfectly situated to have that narrative structure of, here's the bad guy, here's the goons, you know, and here's, you know, and I just feel like that plays a huge role as well. Not only that we have the ultimate bad guy, but we have the ultimate goons as well.
Yeah, it's interesting to me because I enjoy watching shows, like TV shows that are like, I'm thinking of like Vikings, The Last Kingdom, these shows that are prior to recorded history, right?
Right.
And war in those times, you know, it was clan driven, local, you know, like, and it even going back to the other war you're talking about in China, you know, it's a lot of infighting, right?
Yeah.
And over years, and you're right. This is the one where it's like, almost from nowhere. It wasn't from nowhere. There's a backstory here.
Right.
But in 2 decades, this person comes to power with his goons, right? Yeah. And it wasn't, you know, kind of for the first time in modern history, it's not infighting, it's not political, it's not religious, it's not necessary. It's infighting. It's just one bad guy and his goons.
Yeah.
Right? And now it's just mission set, right?
Yeah.
Go get the goons.
And I mean, we talked about the scale of the war itself, but the scale of the goal of Nazi Germany and of Hitler, like Hitler's goal was all of Europe, obviously, but in general, I mean, I think it's safe to say that he wanted to be a world dominator, right?
Yeah. And
the scale of just that, like, can you imagine? Like, Germany isn't that big. like you look at Germany on a map, you look at, I mean, Europe, and as Americans, I feel like we often have this misperception of European countries, right? Like, our country is huge geographically, right?
Germany is like a state.
Right, exactly. Our country geographically is very, very large, right?
Yeah.
And we're talking about, I mean, I haven't pulled the numbers for the population back in the day. A very small population that are basically declaring war on the world as it was back in the day, you know?
Yeah.
The scale of the ambition, the scale of, you know, just like And especially once Russia got involved, like, and we started developing, Italy, and once you get like these Axis powers and allied powers, and there's this polarizing, clash, right?
Yeah.
It's so interesting to think that, somebody thought that was obtainable.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It seems so like it's like
Insane.
something that Megamind would think of, like, Will Ferrell. Like, it's like we would kind of make fun of this kind of like villainous type of mindset where like, I'm going to take over the world, Pinky in the Brain, like, like these, like, it's almost comedic, but to think that there was at least at some point in a very near past a person who believed that they could accomplish this,
it's comedic to a point, right? Like, and I shouldn't say
you're right. Yeah.
Comedic is not necessarily maybe the best word, but it is comedic to a point.
Mm-hmm.
And at which point that, like, it became something.
Yeah.
Right? Like, how does this, like, in retrospect, right? Hindsight's 2020.
Yeah.
How do you let this guy become the guy he was? But at the same time, we also now have instant access to news around the world, right?
Yeah.
And this is one of the things that I wanted to talk about in this episode. It's like, if you control the media, and the media is kind of slow, it's printed media, or it's not word of mouth.
Yeah.
In a controlled environment, you can let this fester, and it can become something a lot bigger than what you think it could become, or at least what we imagine it could become today, because today's, kudos to today's journalists and stuff around the world, but they don't let this stuff happen. They just, they're all over it, and they broadcast this stuff around the world.
Right. You just saying that made me think of something. 1938, there was this phenomenon. People thought America was being invaded by Martians. And it was it was an invention. The War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells.
Yes.
And it's hard for us, and I'm assuming you're a millennial watching this, and forgive me if I'm wrong, but I'm speaking to you directly at this point. As a millennial, I know it's hard to kind of comprehend that a radio show that's trying to be entertaining accidentally convinced thousands, maybe millions, I don't know, thousands of people at least, that America was being invaded by Martians. And if you don't know what we're talking about, I don't want to go into too much detail about it, but look up the H.G. Wells War of the Worlds. It's important to know, I feel like, because it kind of speaks to this idea of propaganda and how easy it was to really kind of set your own agenda, really with a nation, especially when we're talking about a nation like we've discussed that's not very large.
Today we'd call it false news, right? We call it false news.
Fake news.
Fake news. Thank you. So the link there between then and today is we have this. Let's just pick QAnon. Whether you believe it or not, QAnon is this thing that has become something in a relatively short amount of time because of personalized news feeds. Yeah. I'll call it that. Yeah. Right. And when you personalize your news feed, that's one thing. But back in 1940s, 1930s, even going back to the First World War, you didn't even get to personalize it. You just consumed what was printed, right?
Yeah. You only had really one or two ways to really verify if something was real. Yeah. Apart from being there yourself.
Yeah.
It is hard to kind of imagine that world where you're relying on the radio really for a lot, really all of your information, all of your entertainment, or most of your entertainment at least. The amount of freedom we have today with being able to double, triple, quadruple, sometimes more than that, check what we're reading and what we're looking into, and we can validate things pretty quickly. You don't have that back in the time that we're talking about, in the 1940s and World War II. So, I think part of the reason that it's so memorable is because of that as well, because we we've come so far technology wise where it's it's hard to believe that somebody can, or somebody or a political movement or anything like that can actually get to the level that was at.
Yeah.
I'm not going to say it can't happen, but it's hard to believe that it can happen again. At least to that scale.
One of the other reasons, and we talked about it last episode, but I think it's worth mentioning again because I think there's a lot of probably people our age, a little bit older, a little bit younger, that this has impacted. The war is recent because our families tell us stories of the war. You know? It's still something that's very alive in our families' histories, right? And whether you immigrated to the United States because of the war, or your family fought in the war, or our great uncle, worked on wartime activities that weren't, front lines.
Yeah,
all that kind of stuff is still really embedded in people's family identities. I think, too. So, give it a couple more generations, and I think some of those things probably disappear, sadly. But it becomes less fresh, and the stories kind of get lost in families. So I think doing what we're doing here is really, I think it's cool to honor the people that stood up to this evil, and that did what they did and answered the call. And I hope that people that pick up these games can remember not only it's fun to play the games, but it's also
the celebration.
There's history there. There's history there, right?
Yeah.
And if you play the game, try and at least refresh your memory on some of those things, because there's lessons in humanity.
Don't play it blindly. Understand, and that's really, and when we were choosing games for this conversation, we bounced around games like Axis and Allies and Risk and other games. We landed on Memoir 44, at least in my eyes, because it does such a great job of it does something it really didn't need to do. It could have just made up fake scenarios, right?
Yes.
It could have easily kind of sold you on this, like, kind of like Call of Duty, and I'm speaking outside of my expertise. I'm always speaking outside of my expertise, but I'm speaking outside of my expertise with Call of Duty. My understanding of like Call of Duty and the other video games or anything like that deals with World War II, they're kind of sending you on these fake missions, right? And you're not really doing anything that might have happened in reality. What Memoir 44 does is they really do kind of put you in these situations that historically have happened, and it kind of forces you to kind of imagine what it's like. There's one scenario specifically that actually has you put units in your hand, you hold your hand over the board, and you drop the units onto the board to represent paratrooping. And what happened with airborne didn't exist before World War II. I feel like that's common knowledge, but if you didn't know that, the airborne units were built during, all you gotta do is watch Band of Brothers to understand this. Band of Brothers does a great job of following these guys, airborne infantry, and how they became, utilized, and how they were utilized in World War II. Some of these drops that they did weren't very accurate, and they're doing it in horrible conditions. If you get out of the plane alive, right, you're landing somewhere where you weren't anticipating on landing. So Memoir 44, in that situation, you're holding your hand out over the board and you're dropping, and you want your units to land in a specific place, right, so that you can have the advantage. Something as simple as that, you're realizing like how little control really some of these guys had over really dire situations. And I think, in whether or not that was on purpose, I feel like it was for Days of Wonder, but whether or not it was, I feel Memoir 44 does such a great job of really kind of getting you into this mindset and being historically accurate maybe as best as they could, and really kind of admiring, that process.
It tells the story too. I mean,
Mhm.
in the scenarios, it
Yeah.
says this is what was going on, and
Yeah.
we alluded to that back in episode 1,
Yeah.
or the first episode of this series. But I mean, Axis and Allies touches on that, but then it just kind of like sets you free, right?
Lets you go.
And,
Yeah.
Yeah, and there's other war games that touch on that, and then it lets you go.
Yeah.
But and Memoir does a very good job of saying, "This is what you got." Like,
Yeah.
these are the micro decisions that were being made
Yeah. Micro
by people during battles, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it does a good job of setting that stuff up.
Yeah. Woo! What a great conversation. I feel like we handled it well. I'm it is kind of it's so weird because World War II is so mainstream now. Like everybody knows World War II. I mean, it's been lampooned, it's been made fun of, it's been obviously it's been the center of a lot of dramatic narratives as well. It's such an interesting conversation, but at the same time, it is a very it does need to be handled the right way, and I like that. I like that you and I can navigate that with respect and also with intrigue and with humor. I hopefully if you're listening or watching, hopefully you've gotten a lot out of it too. That something that isn't really presented in the movies or maybe in a book or anything like that, or like on a documentary or something. I like looking at it through the lens of two millennials that are grateful for the experiences that or for the sacrifices that have been made from our grandfathers and grandfathers of others, but also just kind of reflecting on it and seeing the bigger picture of what it has led to in our current lives. So yeah, good conversation, Rob.
You too, bro. Thanks for the invite. I'm happy to co-host, and I hope that I hope Alex's family is doing well.
Yeah. So. Yeah. I mean, who knows? We could. I mean, by the time this airs, Alex he should be at least a father. So pray. Yeah. So congratulations, Alex. We're so happy for you. We're looking forward to having you back. Again, like, subscribe, guys. Please subscribe if you like the content. It helps us out a lot. Rob, thanks again for filling in, for being such a great conversationalist, and for being a good bro. And shout out to Urban Artifact, Operation Plow, Operation Plowshare. Rob, what was yours again?
One I'm in the episode on is a Maduro Brown Ale. Maduro is down in Tampa, Florida. They do a good job.
Nice.
Cigar City Brewing, I'm sorry. They do a great job down there. So
Cigar City Brewing. Good.
Yep.
All right. And we can see Purdue Pete now. Hold him up.
Ooh.
There you go. There's Purdue Pete. Shout out to Lafayette, Indiana. All you Boilermakers that are watching us from Lafayette, Indiana. All 5 of you. We appreciate watching and listening. Boiler up. All right. I did it.
You did it.
I've done chirp chirp a couple times. I'll do boiler up as well. All right, that's fine. All right. Well, that's the episode for you guys. That's the episode for the month as well. Next month, who knows what we'll be talking about, but hopefully we'll be posting up next week with that. But until next time, guys,
be happy,
brew hoppy, and game on.
Game on.
Cheers, Rob.
Cheers.
Thanks for joining.
Thanks for having me.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for watching. During the editing process, it just kind of hit me that the best way to close this out is just to say thank you to all the servicemen and women. Obviously, not just to those that served in World War II, but those that continue to serve, those that have served since then. Obviously, everybody, thank you for your service. I hope everybody's staying safe during this pandemic. People like you, obviously, that help us be able to do what we do. And I understand just a little bit about the type of sacrifice that takes, and I respect that a great deal. So best way to close this out was just to say thank you to everybody, and thank you for watching.
Alex is going to be back next week, really. We're going to be starting off March with a new series about baseball. So tune in next week for Alex and I. We'll be back together and we'll be talking about baseball. All right, we'll see you guys soon.